Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone, and I am Doug Buchanan. I'm editor of Columbus Business First and a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Today's forum is sponsored by the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, so we thank the group here up front. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. Okay, on today's topic. Ohioans aren't used to bare store shelves apart from the occasional pre-snowstorm emergencies, and while most shelves in the U.S. stores are far from empty, some items have become harder to find during the pandemic. This crisis of the world's supply chains is the result of complex interlocking circumstances. Ohio has a role in addressing many of them, and today we'll unpack the global supply chain crisis and Ohio's role in fixing it with our panel of experts. Ken Ackerman with the KB Ackerman Company, Dr. Keely Croxton, Professor of Logistics with the Department of Marketing and Logistics at The Ohio State University's Fisher College of Business, Charles Goodwin, the Director of Operations and Aviation Business Services for the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and our host, Eleanor Kennedy, the Assistant Managing Editor of Columbus Business First. Eleanor, we look forward to today's conversation, and you can learn more about today's speaker in your forum flyer. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and hello to our panelists. Thank you so much. So let's just go ahead and dive in by setting the scene. We've heard a lot about the supply chain crisis, and as Doug mentioned in the introduction, it's extremely complicated. So Keely, can you just tell us exactly how we got here?
Ooh, how we got here.
You can fill the whole time if you want.
I was going to say, don't get me started. I'm a professor. I just start rambling. I describe it as a bit of a perfect storm. As a result of COVID, demand has kind of been all over the place. At the start of the pandemic, demand for some products really tanked, others took off. We started to see empty shelves. At the same time, as we've come out of the pandemic, now demand has increased to like roughly 20 to 30% higher than pre-pandemic levels. So our demand for just about everything really has shot up. And at the same time, we had a lot of supply constraints. We can go into those in more detail, but all across the supply chain and all across the globe. So we've got demand up and supply down, which is already a recipe for a problem. At the same time, I would argue that we've designed supply chains over the last 20 or 30 years to be pretty brittle. And so they just really haven't been able to withstand this kind of a disruption. I likened it, as I was thinking about it this morning, to a glass house, and I've been studying supply chain resilience for 20 years or so, and over the last 20 years, we've seen all sorts of pebbles thrown at that glass house, but this is kind of like somebody picked up a large large handful of pebbles and just bombarded our glass house from all angles, so we just haven't been able to withstand that much pressure. So that's my short answer. I can provide more detail later.
Well, could you all unpack a little bit? You mentioned just the growing demand in the wake of the pandemic. What is driving that? The stimulus primarily? Or is that a global situation?
I think some of it's certainly the stimulus packages worked well. You know, one could argue maybe too well. And then there's just been pent-up demand. So, we've all been hunkered down and spending money in some places that we weren't before, but now feeling a little bit of relief, being able to get out and, get back to going to restaurants and traveling and picking up our spending along the way. So, the good news is our economy's been able, because of the stimulus, the economy's been able to prosper as our demands have increased, but it has created some strong pressures on the supply chain for sure.
Got it. Well, if y'all could unpack a little bit some of the pain points that we have seen. What are the biggest pressures that we're experiencing and areas where we're feeling that glass house collapsing? I forget the exact wording you used.
So I'll jump in on the supply side. So I think in addition to the demand increasing, as Keely said, most folks don't realize that more than half of the world's air cargo will travel in the bellies of passenger aircraft. And with COVID and all the travel restrictions, that capacity was essentially eliminated significantly. And so what you saw was a lot of congestion and movement away from those passenger aircraft to other modes, whether it's ocean or the freighters that may be available. And we did see airlines start to convert passenger aircraft to put that cargo in the main cabin, removing seats, stacking boxes, netting them down. And so that supply issue certainly contributed to the problems that we're having today, for sure.
Ken, where else have we seen notable problems?
I think the thing that has attracted the media more than anything else is the California bottleneck, the ocean bottleneck, the ships anchored off California. In my opinion, that is a man-made problem. It is a result of some fairly slimy behavior from some labor officials and from California public officials. And it is a fact that the American seaports are among the least productive and least advanced in the world, don't come up to what you see in Rotterdam or Singapore. So it's a man-made problem, which is kind of shameful.
Can you expand on that a little bit? What's the slimy behavior we're seeing?
Well, let's get specific. 40 years ago, most truck drivers were union members, had to be, and today in 2022, most truck drivers are not union members, but there are some unions in California that want to keep all independent truckers out of the ports. That's a man-made problem. It's inexcusable in my book, and the public officials are encouraging it. There is all kinds of automation that you will find outside the United States, as close as Mexico, that is not being used in California. So it's a man-made problem.
Well, the topic of labor, not necessarily organized, but just more broadly, I think is tied into this, and the Great Resignation and other issues with there just not being the workforce that people need. Can you all talk a little bit about how that is impacting some of the supply crunch if we literally don't have the people to move goods along the line?
I think that's a big part of the problem. And the thing about it is that that's a global problem, right? It's not just in the U.S. So when we have these long global supply chains, all those nodes are being impacted by the labor shortages resulting out of COVID. And I think that that's certainly contributing. As a logistics person, I like to think about the planes and the ships and the trucks and all of that, but it's also manufacturing capacity that's been reduced as a result of the employment shortage. So it really does become a global supply chain issue.
I think just kind of piggybacking off of Ken's comment on the truck issue on the West Coast. I think in the Midwest and other parts of the U.S., the COVID increased the amount of e-commerce significantly, and I think we saw a lot of truck drivers leave the industry, which led to a shortage of trucks to get those goods from the warehouses to their final destinations, whether it's from the airport to a downstream receiving warehouse, onto a retailer's, dock. So I think that COVID, the Amazons and all of the e-commerce, there's been a shift away from those over-the-road trucks and local truck drivers to other industries or other types of driving that it just exacerbated the capacity shortfall.
So this is a global problem. We've said a couple times here. How can we in Central Ohio do anything about it, or what relevance do we have to this issue?
Well, I think as a logistics hub, Columbus and Central Ohio is so well located to be a driving force, but in the supply chain, and it is today, and there's opportunity to grow that. But we've got, between our highways and our rail system, so much potential to reach the U&I, as well as our manufacturing capacity. We're within like a day's drive of, is it 60%, Ken? something like that. I think a day's drive, 60% of the US population, and a large percentage of the manufacturing capacity. So that in and of itself creates opportunities for Ohio to play a role. Again, as it has over the last decades. I mean, I think we've been doing that, and we can continue to do that.
I think the silver lining in this, both I think for the supply chain and for Columbus, is that, you know, habits are very hard to break. And over the years, and at least in the 19 years that I've been in Columbus, there has been a significant effort to convince freight forwarders and shippers to move away from the international gateways, the Chicagos and JFKs. We've been working to establish Columbus and Rickenbacker specifically as a global air gateway alternative away from those other major gateways. And I think what you're seeing now is, because of the crisis, quite frankly, that was created with COVID, those forwarders and shippers are looking to decentralize some of those activities away from those major gateways because of the risk that they've experienced, quite frankly, the pain that they've experienced with the heavy congestion. And not that everyone's been immune from congestion at their local airports, but the gateways were just inundated and overwhelmed with the amount of freight and cargo and congestion and delays of that freight. So I think the silver lining is that we are doing what we need to do to help. I think there's a great opportunity at Rickenbacker in the surrounding area. We've seen significant growth in our activity, a 60% bump. We saw 60% of the activity from the first quarter to the second quarter increase. Literally in 30 days, we went from 100 airplanes a month to 150 or 160 airplanes a month. Our supply chain, we weren't ready for that, right? So we saw congestion, not only on airport, but at the downstream receiving warehouses. Everyone had to kind of step up the game, and they did. They responded. There's a great collaboration between the airport authority as ramp handlers, the on-airport warehouses, and the downstream CFSs. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration on how we move that freight. I think that's going to be the recipe for our success long term, is to continue to build on what Columbus has established over the years as the Columbus way, and that is talking with each other to make sure that the goods keep flowing.
I'll add just one thought to that. You mentioned the belly freight issue that when COVID started, 60% of our freight moved as belly freight. And while international travel has picked back up, I just heard that, I think it was, I can't remember who made the prediction, but somebody made a prediction that international business travel is going to remain at 25% below pre-pandemic levels, because we've gotten pretty good at doing business via Zoom and other technology. And so while some of that belly freight is coming back, much of it isn't. And so we're going to continue to see more freighters, and that's not going to return to pre-pandemic levels. So places like Rickenbacker and Central Ohio become pretty attractive for that freight to land, because doesn't need to land at passenger airports, doesn't need to land in Chicago anymore. So I think that trend is probably, some of it is here to stay.
Part of the problem, too, here is man-made, management-made, and that is that we have made logistics jobs look kind of crappy. There aren't very many mothers at the breakfast table today who said, "Johnny, I hope when you grow up you'll be a truck driver." I think that's just a fact. Truck driving used to be a wonderful job. Now, there's one big logistics service company that has no trouble getting people, and I check with them frequently to see if I'm wrong on that. It's a little outfit called UPS. UPS, a high percentage of their senior management started as freight handlers. There's a retired division president of UPS in New Albany he was president for all of Europe. He started his career as a freight handler. So UPS has a school in Columbus, sort of a coaching. They're reviving the medieval practice of apprenticeship, teaching people how to do jobs instead of hoping they can hire people that already know how to do the jobs. So they set the example on how to get good people and keep them.
Well, I was wondering, Charlie, if you could talk a little bit more about how Rickenbacker responded to that congestion yourself. What were some of the specific challenges? And are you talking about additional infrastructure investment, hiring? What did you do to solve our local supply chain crunch?
We worked many more hours to start with. I think a lot of it was communication, right? We did work with our warehouse. We worked with CBP, our customs partners, to make sure that we weren't accepting airplanes that we couldn't process in a timely fashion. I think a lot of it was counterintuitive to some folks to say limit the amount of activity you're handling, but we really felt that it was essential that we lived up to the promise and the commitments we made to our forwarding partners and the airlines that we work with to make sure that if the freight came here, that the airplane was going to get handled in a timely fashion and the freight was going to move off the airport. Having said that, because of some downstream processes and because we weren't totally prepared for just the sheer volume of that, combined with the trucking situation and getting freight off the airport, we did see some congestion. What we saw was we actually have shippers, our partners at L Brands and others. We've got some freight forwarding partners with us today and expediters in Kintetsu worldwide with us today. We've been very collaborative in talking with them about what warehouse has capacity, when can we send it, and where should we send it. So we were playing that, we were pivoting as those airplanes were being scheduled and that freight was coming in on what warehouse, what downstream warehouse was going to receive the freight, just to keep it moving. And we could shift between warehouses just to make sure, and those were daily phone calls we had with our partners, just to make sure that to the extent that we could keep stuff out of the weather and moving off the airport, that we did that.
What other, Ken, you mentioned UPS. What other examples are there of people responding to this effectively? Where have we done things right? What are some solutions that are being implemented?
I think in some cases, companies, I can just see this from my own research over the last 20 years on disruptions, a lot of companies had been thinking about how to be more resilient over the last couple decades, particularly in the last 5 or 10 years. And so while we weren't ready for all the pebbles to hit the glass house, we were, I think companies by and large, a lot of them had spent time becoming more resilient. And I think that helped. So it didn't keep the toilet paper on the shelves necessarily in March of 20, but it did help. I had a conversation, it was maybe summer of 2020 with folks at Coca-Cola who said, thank goodness we at least were more resilient than we were 5 years ago because it helped us get through this better than we thought we might be able to. So I think there are companies that had prepared not for anything the size of COVID and the magnitude, but had found ways to be more flexible and agile, and I think that has helped in some cases.
I'd like to refer to a slide, presentation by a guy by the name of Mitch McDonald, who is CEO of Agile Business Media, which is a big supply chain publishing company. He said, consider the holidays, which were supposed to be totally disruptive. The New York Times reports that everybody got their Christmas packages. UPS and USPS delivered 99% of their packages on time or with minimal delays, according to Ship Matrix. By one measure, UPS, FedEx, and Postal Service were actually faster this past Christmas season than they were in 2019. So maybe the chain isn't broken.
I did wind up with multiple Christmas stockings for my daughter because there was some concern over if the ones that we had ordered were going to get there in time. So Christmas was saved. Her 10-month-old mind couldn't have handled it if the stockings didn't get there on time. Well, can you talk a little bit more of, one idea is on the manufacturing side of making all of this, going from just in time to just in case. What sort of evolutions are we seeing there, and long-term changes are going to come on getting the supplies out there?
I think that even, it was after the tsunami, what was that, a decade ago or more, even companies like Toyota started holding more inventory. And if you don't know, Toyota's kind of like the grandfather of lean manufacturing and just in time. And even they, as a result of the events after the tsunami, said, okay, we need to be a little bit more strategic and not all inventory is bad. So I think that companies are realizing that, and it doesn't mean that they're going to add a lot of inventory all through the supply chain, but they're going to think more critically about where that inventory should be and how they should manage it. So I think that's one opportunity that we might see come out of this. I believe we will see more onshoring or at least nearshoring, and I've been saying that for a while, and it's slowly been happening. But I think that you're seeing it, with Intel trying to bring more manufacturing closer to the consumer. And some of that might not mean coming to the U.S. It might mean coming to parts of Central and South America. It might even mean trying to use Europe a bit more, so avoid the West Coast ports. But I think that companies are going to start thinking more about where they source and manufacture their products. And I think we'll see a shift there over the next 5 years.
And I'd just jump in and say that I think we need to just keep doing what we've been doing, and that is building infrastructure. Our partners from MORPC, ODOT, Jobs Ohio have all been very supportive and participating directly in the advancement of our capacity build. Columbus has got great geography, as Keely mentioned earlier. We've got great facilities. It's a logistics smart city. And we just have to keep building on that capability. And I think that our adding pharmaceutical handling, we've got animal handling, we've got general cargo handling. We'll be looking to build e-commerce capabilities. So there's a lot of opportunity for Columbus in the years ahead. And we're just seeing a lot of excitement about Rickenbacker and Columbus in general. People want to get away from the major gateways right now, or at least diversify and decentralize their activities. So lots of opportunity here in Columbus. We're excited for it.
At Rickenbacker, you're seeing so much warehouse development there at your industrial park, somewhat connected to all of these trends that we've talked about. How much bigger can you get? How many more warehouses are we going to get out there?
Oh, that's a great question. So I read a great article yesterday about 320 acres about to be opened up for some additional outside
Columbus
the
Business First,
That's
Columbus's
right,
premier business publication.
Exactly. So there will be, I think that's room for about 4.5 million more square feet of off-airport, but obviously it's adjacent to the airport. We do have a master plan that suggests that we need as much as 900,000 square feet of on-airport warehousing space over the next 20 years. So we'll be looking to grow that warehouse space on airport. And those are the folks that will have direct access to our ramps, our taxiways, our runways. And then, of course, we'll be feeding that to the off-airport warehouses. So it's an exciting time. There's plenty of capacity in Columbus, we plan to take advantage of it.
What are some of the broader economic impacts of this growth we're seeing in industrial real estate out here? Just more broadly, what can that do for the economy, or does that raise any concerns about us getting overbuilt?
I'm concerned about overbuilding. Having been in this town for 6.5 decades, I've seen Columbus get overbuilt, and you see changes. There was a wonderful place in Wilmington, Ohio, where they built about 1 million square feet of warehousing, and I have joked that it's a great place to grow mushrooms today, because nobody needs warehouses in Wilmington as they did when Airborne operated a air facility there. So what goes up can come down, and I'm concerned that the real estate bubble in Columbus could burst.
Does anybody agree or disagree?
I just think, again, to the point of companies decentralizing and moving away from the major gateways, I think that would help mitigate, at least in part, some of the potential for the overbuild condition or a collapse in the warehousing space market. I do think that, again, habits are very hard to break, and the fact that we've been able to, through this COVID process, experience a lot of new customers and hear from them directly that the congestion at the major ports is no longer sustainable. It's not going to get better at Chicago or New York or LA, and they're looking for alternatives. So whether or not that is a few million square feet of space, or I can't answer that, but I do think there's going to be some movement towards communities that have cargo-focused airports like Rickenbacker.
This is go ahead, Keely.
I was going to say, I worry a little bit about the growth and the pressure it puts on the labor market as well. I mean, being at Ohio State, I hope that we can pump out lots and lots of graduates to fill all these positions, not only in supply chain, but everything that's going to be required from companies like Intel. And and others. So I think, I mean, you know, growth is great, but it always comes with some pain points, and I think whether or not there's going to be a kind of, you know, what comes up must come down crash, I won't weigh in on that one, but I do think that with that growth, we got to think a little bit about the labor market and frankly, the real estate market and what it means for the city. But that's outside of the supply chain context.
Well, one thing I wonder about, we've written a lot about the supply chain from the perspective of, you know, builders. We have this huge housing crunch here in Central Ohio, but it's really hard to build a lot of houses to fill that need if you don't know when you're going to be able to get your materials. So we're talking kind of, you know, macro, we have this opportunity, but what advice, what can a builder do right now who is confronting this problem day to day, being able to get the stuff that they need?
That is, you build for resale, and one of the things that I find alarming is the number of buildings of about 1 million and 2 million square feet, and those will become white elephants because very few people need 1 million square feet. And fire underwriters are concerned about how many dollars are under one roof, and they don't want more than, say, $1 billion under one roof. And when you have 1 million square feet, you can get to that. So that's going to be a problem that nobody seems to be willing to address.
Well, Keely, you mentioned Intel as a company that is onshoring here that, you know, I think everyone in Central Ohio is very excited about. Are there other industries you see a lot of potential for them to bring some production here to Central Ohio, or can you talk a little bit more about the ramifications of that trend?
Well, I think, again, because of our geography and because of some of the issues going on in the supply chains, I don't know that I think of particular industries that make Central Ohio attractive. I think being closer to your consumer base is always more attractive for industries that have very valuable products, so pharmaceuticals and the like, and products that have very unstable demand. So you want to be, you don't want these long supply chains when you don't know what demand's going to be. So those are some qualities, I think, of what could make onshoring in general more attractive. I mean, Central Ohio has a lot going for it in terms of labor costs and cost of living and growth potential and all of that. So I think that it could be attractive to a multitude of industries. We obviously have a lot of retail and apparel here, so I could see us growing in that space as well, more apparel manufacturing coming in, particularly as right now, you probably know a lot of our clothes are made in the Far East, but there's been some trend to move that back, again, closer to the demand because of the unpredictable nature of fashion. So that would be one place where, because we already have a lot of activity in apparel, that I think we could possibly grow. And then the auto industry also presents lots of opportunities just because there's so much manufacturing capacity, in the 3 or 4 states that surround us, that I think we have opportunity to grow there as well.
Charlie, any industries you see strong increased demand for that, making Columbus their gate of choice?
Well, I think certainly we're hopeful that electronics will be a growth opportunity for us, and semiconductors as well with the Intel announcement. We did get inquiries on semiconductors even prior to the announcement, so I hope that's a trend, that seems to be a general view that there's an opportunity in Columbus for that type of commodity to flow through us. And certainly pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are there's a lot of manufacturing here in the Midwest. A lot of those items are being trucked to the major gateways, whether it's New York or Chicago now. And most excursions from a pharmaceutical standpoint will happen at the airport, right, during those times of transition. So we think that with our added capacity for that type of commodity, that there's an opportunity for growth here in Columbus for pharmaceuticals. We're excited about that.
I want to go back to the kind of macro perspective. Where are we on the timeline of this crisis? How long are we going to continue to be talking about issues in the supply chain?
Till I retire, at least, please. I think most experts and most of the data seems to point at 2022 continuing to be rough. Some relief in 2023, both from the supply and the demand side, and maybe back to a new normal in 2024. I think some things will continue to be different than they were, 2018, 2019, but maybe not talking about supply chains at the dinner table quite as much as we are now. But it's not tomorrow or the next day. I think it's going to be a gradual process. The problem is there's not one bottleneck. There's like 20 bottlenecks, and you fix one, and it just kind of moves. And so, we're a little bit playing whack-a-mole. But hopefully that slows down, I'd say in a year, 2 years. What are your thoughts?
That's certainly what we're hearing is the 2022 is going to continue to be rough. They see some easing maybe at the end of the year from a capacity standpoint. But I did see that I think some of the passenger airlines really aren't forecasting a significant return to international passenger travel until 2025 even. So it's going to be several years before we see normalcy, if you will. But I think in the meantime, a lot of people are trying to do their best to make sure this doesn't happen again, right? And insulate themselves from error-proof the process as much as they can just by decentralizing and being smarter about the supply chain.
One of the things we need to recognize, though, and it goes back to Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, that the mass media discovered that bad news sells more newspapers than good news. And I don't think the problem is as bad as the media want to make us believe it is.
We're sorry. Well, I do, I think I guess we all remember not being able to get toilet paper, but I'm not sure that we see as many of those consumer side issues right now in the grocery stores, at least. So for the rest of us, maybe it's okay. Well, let's see. What have I not asked you about the supply chain that you want people to know?
Let me point out one fact. One of the most critical commodities that any of us ever buy or sell is the cost of money. And the cost of money today is at record lows in the United States. If you were a businessman in Buenos Aires this morning and wanted to borrow money, the interest rate is 40%. I checked it on the web this morning. They say that the price of money may go up a little bit in March, and now they're saying probably less of an increase than we thought. So one of the pieces of good news that affects all of our lives is that the price of money relative to everything else is very low.
I guess I would just make an additional comment that I would argue that we as consumers are a part of the problem. And I think that Amazon has created a bit of a monster in terms of the expectations that they've set with us as consumers. And we want everything now, even when we don't need it now. And I think we have to remind ourselves that, not everything needs to be next day, and it's okay to wait a couple days for something that's not urgent. So I think there's I think companies need to make a lot of changes. I think there's infrastructure changes that need to be made. But I also think, and the other thing, that consumer hoarding that was taking place, right? We were buying 6 months worth of toilet paper. I mean, that's completely illogical. That kind of consumer behavior, I think, has become part of the problem. So I'm encouraging everybody to be a little more patient and not expect everything to arrive next day. Especially, I think most of the inflation is today's inflation is being driven by all these challenges. And if we don't want to see everything cost more, we need to maybe lower our expectations a little bit. No one wants to hear that, I know, but.
Well, I want to return to the labor topic that we've touched on a few times here. And, Ken, you talked about truck driving not necessarily being a particularly attractive job these days. I think there's a lot of perceptions about what it's like to work in an Amazon warehouse. How can we fix that problem? How can we get more people working in these logistics positions that could help alleviate this crisis?
The good news about much of the supply chain industry is the mobility. The fact that if you look at the senior management team at UPS, the number of them that started as freight handlers, we have the ability to pull people up, to teach people to do new jobs, and the supply chain industry is much stronger. You won't find very many bank tellers who become bank presidents, but you will find a lot of freight handlers who reach senior management levels. That's the good news, and we need to keep it that way.
I would say that the pressure on labor has certainly elevated labor cost, and in most cases, I know in the Rickenbacker area, it's not uncommon to see people making $20 or more an hour as entry-level labor, which 3 years ago would have been unheard of. It would have been $12 or $13 an hour, maybe $14 an hour. So I think we're seeing people stick around in the industry a little bit longer than they might otherwise, just because of the salary increases, the wage increases, and to Ken's point, we have been integrating those handlers into our management team over time. So I think there is opportunity, as Ken mentioned, for us to learn from other industries like UPS and have people have a living wage and do well and do better in our industry.
We will move to questions from our live stream and in-person audience in just a few minutes. So if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. Before we take audience questions, I have one final question for our panelists. I feel like this is a tough one because it's another one of those, it's a good thing to have, but this massive Intel investment, they're going to be needing a lot of these supplies, building supplies that's tough for other people to get right now. Do you see any pressures or issues coming for that, or is that just a good problem for the Central Ohio economy to have?
I think it depends on timing. I haven't heard much about when they want to break ground, but I think there certainly are going to be. I mean, I just look at the speed of houses going up in my neighborhood, and it's just so slow. I mean, one house will sit there. There's one in my neighborhood that's been there for 4 months waiting for windows, and it's being built by a builder. So, I mean, for his own use. So he should get first dibs on his materials if he wants them. And he's being delayed for windows. So I think that it is. If they want to move quickly soon, it could be a problem. I mean, they have the advantage of, having Intel on their side. So they're going to start to be the gorilla in the room when it comes to getting things built.
Can I change the subject from building supplies to industrial supplies? Wholesaler, one of our fast growth Columbus companies, opening an East Coast warehouse. They've got the real estate. They're ready to open. The delivery time for new forklift trucks is 1 year. So they're stuck with a situation where they're going to pay rent on a, say, 200,000 square foot building, and they can't operate without forklift trucks, and they can't get trucks. That is really terrifying and kind of mysterious to me.
Well, it is CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Montra Moody of CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For our in-house audience, please join Montra at the microphone. I see several of you have. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. Montra, what is our first question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the panelists. Thank you to the panelists for speaking today. Appreciate it. Our first question is from Trip Lazarus, and you touched on this a little bit, Keely. He asked, how much are the supply chain issues contributing to inflation? So maybe we can talk about that a little bit more in detail.
I think they're, and I'm not an economist. I will look down at my friend here to maybe come up and help me with this question. But so from a non-economist viewpoint, I think it's a major part of the inflation that we're seeing. Ocean freight costs are up, I think it's 3 times. Air freight costs are double, yeah. Manufacturing costs are up because of labor shortages. So again, everywhere along the supply chain, things are more expensive, and companies can eat that for a while, but at some point it comes along to the consumer. So again, not from an economist viewpoint, but from a supply chain standpoint, it sure seems like it's the leading cause of our current inflation.
Professor, I apologize. I needed black ink for my printer very badly Sunday to print some things I needed to print on Monday. So I went to Amazon Plus and placed the order, and Monday the ink arrived. Is Amazon taking up warehouse space in Central Ohio that other businesses, manufacturers and so forth could be using, but is filled with things like printer's ink that I needed?
What have you take? You probably know most about the pressure on our warehouse system.
I think the answer is no. Amazon's building its own facilities as fast as it's occupying them, so I don't think it's adding any pressure at all.
All right, our next online question is from Bob James. Will the recent infrastructure bill help, or is it too little and too late to bring our seaports and airports into the 21st century?
So I'm happy to jump in on that. No, I think the infrastructure bill is definitely going to be very helpful. We have a number of projects at Rickenbacker that are eligible for FAA AIP funding, and we expect to take full advantage of the infrastructure bill money to fill in some gaps we have in our parking areas. Quite frankly, parking ramps, we never thought that Rickenbacker would have a problem with congestion on parking ramps, but those airplanes take up a lot of space, and we've had as many as 4 or 5 wide bodies on the ramp at once, and we just really haven't been designed for that. So that money is going to be very helpful for us. And I'm sure that for highways and other infrastructure projects, bridges, it's going to be a significant improvement for the nation and Columbus.
Is there other federal support that would help you, or anything else that the federal government could be doing right now to alleviate this crisis?
Well, so the FAA does have an airport improvement program. It's an annual appropriation that airports take advantage of regularly. This infrastructure bill is basically just going to be supporting and supersizing the scale of that specific program. The eligibility requirements are going to be substantially the same, non-exclusive public use facilities. So primarily it's going to be the FAA. The military has some opportunity for contributing to Rickenbacker. They've contributed in the past, and certainly we'll be looking at them to help us in the future if they have the ability to do so.
I think it would be wonderful if some of the infrastructure emphasis were placed on automating our seaports so that Southern California productivity approached that of Singapore and Rotterdam.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Wayhoff with Steptoe and Johnson. And it seems as though another resource Ohio has is an increasing supply of polyethylene from the production going on in the plastic crescent on our east because of the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale. Are any of you seeing an increase in plastics manufacturing in Ohio in our near future?
I don't. I do know that we have seen raw materials exported from Rickenbacker to Europe of a plastics nature. So we know it's occurring somewhere nearby. We're not sure what the origin is, but it is being exported from Rickenbacker.
Well, there's a big plant, Shell Oil Company, put up in western Pennsylvania, or that is really closer to here, as far as logistics. So anyway, thank you.
All right, our next question from online. Mindy Justice asks, is a full degree required to enter a logistics job? And must you have one to enter management with regards to fixing the labor shortage?
Certainly, it depends what role you want to have in the logistics system. A four-year degree is by no means needed for entry-level positions, either in the transportation or warehousing industry. We have a very strong program in logistics at Fisher, and most of our students are going on to kind of entry-level management positions or analytical positions. So there's lots of opportunity for folks that have that education And we're seeing more students interested in that, thanks to all these dinner conversations that people are having. So while I don't think there's any parents saying, Johnny, I hope you grow up to be a truck driver, I think there's more parents saying, Johnny, what's the supply chain all about, and should you go study that? So I think that depending on kind of where you want to enter, to Ken's point, the growth is potential is there wherever you start. But if you want to start in kind of a management or analytical position, then places like Ohio State are happy to educate folks to make that happen.
Yeah, and I'll say that over the past several years, the Airport Authority, at least in its operations division, and now in our ground handling division, we are accepting candidates and have hired a number of them without college degrees. And we expect to continue to do so, and hopefully they'll pursue education and position themselves for, elevation into management positions. But we're definitely hiring frontline staff without college degrees, which is not something we've done historically.
Hi, I'm John Ely with Heartland Industries. And, for years, I've been reading about manufacturers needing to lean on more localized or maybe more regional supply chains. And I think my question is, have we experienced enough pain to get past the increased price? It always seems like price was the barrier there, and it wasn't quality, it wasn't deliverability, it was always price. So have we got past that yet? And do you see regional supply chains becoming more of a trend with manufacturers?
I think that's an outcome, maybe a positive side of all of this. And there still is certainly a price differential. If we source overseas or even, across the country. And companies are always weighing that manufacturing costs and transportation costs and cost of quality and trying to understand that. But the focus, I think, on cost, solely on cost, is changing, and people are realizing that managers and executives are realizing there's a cost associated with not being resilient and not being ready to respond. And it's hard to put numbers on that, but they're starting to, I think, put that in the equation, either in hard numbers or at least in consideration. And so I do think that I think that's what will drive some of the nearshoring that I'm anticipating.
Hi, I'm Jordan Nishizaki from Diverse Network. And Charles, you had mentioned the new Intel chip factory coming to Columbus. And, when we're talking about how to untangle the global supply chain, so how will this new Intel chip factory play a factor into the global supply chain and in Ohio's role?
Levels above my pay grade. But I would say that certainly having those commodities manufactured in the U.S. Will reduce the reliance, quite frankly, on air cargo or other types of international transportation. So at least on the inbound side, our hope is that those commodities will be exported to other countries at some point, and that would contribute, obviously, to the local economy. So whether or not and to what extent that plays a significant role in helping the supply chain, I don't know. I hope it does.
I'm guessing that the companies in the auto industry and electronics were pretty excited to hear that Intel had these plans. And it's not just Central Ohio. They're bringing a lot of their manufacturing to the U.S. And I'm going to guess those companies were excited to hear that because they've been feeling all the pain pretty strongly.
All right, this question is from Sharon Ivanko. Do you think the current environment will prompt companies to rethink planned obsolescence and build products that last longer? And will consumers rethink their expectations?
Great outcome, wouldn't it?
The Apple Corporation about getting rid of planned obsolescence, yeah.
I guess I would be a little surprised if that has much of an impact on the approach. That's a kind of product development and marketing approach. And I don't know, I guess I'd be surprised if there's a huge dent in that behavior as a result of this.
Hi, Andy Campbell with the Workforce Development Board. I'm curious about your thoughts on how climate change may be impacting the infrastructure and really the day-to-day logistics of the supply chain and how people are preparing for that.
I know that the airport authority is certainly supportive of electrification of a number of equipment. We have, I think, Ohio's first bus system with our new consolidated rental car facility operating at the airport now. We've converted from basically all petroleum fuels in our shuttle bus fleet to hybrid fleets where propane and petroleum products are kind of shared and reducing that demand. We have purchased electric ground support equipment at Rickenbacker and continue to install additional infrastructure for those types of devices that we use to load and unload aircraft.
Well, I was thinking more about like the Suez Canal. That incident was caused by high winds, but I'm thinking damages to roads from excessive heat, flooding, storms on coastal ports, those sorts of things.
We're definitely seeing more weather-related disruptions. It's taken a pretty steep climb over the last couple decades, and I think global warming or climate change has a big role to play in that, and that's some of what has spurred companies to think more about being resilient as they're facing more of those types of, freezes in Texas and those kinds of things. So that the range of possible disruptions and the likelihood of those weather-related disruptions, I think, is increasing, and companies are having to realize that.
Hi, I'm Owen Milnes with Columbus Business First, and we talked about Ohio's role in untangling the global supply chain, and we mentioned the Intel plant and this area's infrastructure. Are there any other factors that you guys can think of that would contribute to the area's role in doing so, in untangling the supply chain?
We get good support from our federal partners at Columbus or at the Customs and Border Patrol. So we have been working with them to expand hours of operation and availability for that. But they provide wide availability now. So I don't know incrementally if that's going to be a significant influence on your question.
Hi, I'm Gail Harper Perry with Goodwin Systems. My question is regarding the transportation infrastructure. What would be the requirements to support automated guided trucks, if any?
There are, at the ports, places like Singapore, there are guided vehicles that move the boxes from the ship, far away from the ship, to open places where they are very easily transferred to trucks. And that relieves the port congestion that is bottled up California. And that's a kind of technology that has been used in warehouses for 25 years. It's not new, it's not revolutionary, it's not on highways necessarily, but it moves the product horizontally to a place that's more easily handled.
So I'm interested, my name's Jane Scott. I'm interested in the impact of political unrest, specifically China, Taiwan, maybe even Russia, on what we might be seeing in the next couple of years, or even just the threat of unrest on our supply chain and potentially any kind of upcoming trade wars that could bring us right back around to having horrible supply chain issues.
I think that's all part of the pressure to redesign supply chains. I think, I don't know if before, but in conjunction with all the challenges of COVID, we have, as a country and as government, tried to, I think, limit or change our exposure to China, and trying to become less reliant. And some of that's been just moving to other parts of Southeast Asia, but again, also thinking about moving maybe to other parts of the world. So I do think that's on people's radars as they're thinking about redesigning their supply chain. And I think that is a trend that we will probably continue to see.
Well, we wish we had more time, but we'll turn it back over to Doug Buchanan for concluding remarks.
Okay, well, I hope you found today's forum enlightening. I know I, for one, will feel more guilty about ordering from Amazon in the future, but I'll probably still do it. Me too. Of course. Please make plans to join us next week as CMC presents The State of Downtown, Has Downtown's Trajectory Changed, featuring a new panel of experts. Thank you to today's sponsor, the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, and thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And a special appreciation to today's speakers, Ken Ackerman, Keely Croxton, Charles Goodwin, and our host, Eleanor Kennedy. Let's give them a round of applause one more time. Thank you all for joining us. We could not do it without you, and we look forward to seeing you next week as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Have a good rest of the day.